Let's do it.
Hi.
How are we starting off, Tab?
Just like tell me a little bit about yourselves and tell me a little bit about what brought us here today.
So I'm Max. This is Indigo. We, a few years ago, started a creative agency together called Color Theory, which you also are a part of now, but this had to happen this way.
We had to birth you.
Yeah, exactly. Mommy and daddy.
So we started, really doing design and social for a lot of brands. And then, the reason we're here is because we also started the Charlie Fund. Indigo's one of the co-founders along with me and my parents. And we started the Charlie Fund in 2021. In 2020, my younger brother, Charlie, took his own life. And we decided that we wanted to take the moment to try to educate people about mental well-being, mental health in a kind of different way. Suicide prevention didn't really speak to us, but this idea of emotional intelligence did. And because of Indigo's unbelievable ability to design and create these things and our ability, Tab to find all these amazing things that we talk through in quotes and selections, and for us to have the opportunity to communicate it is really why we started the Charlie Fund. Because there's a lot of mental health organizations out there, and we weren't just going to start one. And we decided that there was enough unique perspective, and to do that and to do this and bring people together for these conversations was a good call.
Yeah.
Do you have anything to add to that?
I feel like that was a perfect synopsis. I mean,
Yeah.
I think in the last year with the Charlie Fund, we've really come into our own and understanding like what our purpose was. I feel like for the first year it was just putting feelers out there to see where can we help and like what already exists. There are so many nonprofits already in the space that are focusing directly on suicide prevention, and I think our approach was more so like, let's rewind, how do you get there when you're in your teens or your 20s or as an adult? And I think most of us never really learned how to talk about our feelings, and so that, like, let's start there and then move forward.
And I think suicide prevention also has this, like, to me, it has this either success or failure thing, where the outcome is very binary.
It's very binary,
and then you have this opportunity with emotional intelligence to give people the opportunity to start learning something that you never master. With learning to use the feelings wheel and assign words to what you feel and your emotions, you never get to a point where you're like, oh, I'm good. You, as your life changes, things around you change, you come into different understanding. And I think like if we can get people in 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, just starting to even think for a second about, am I really angry? How do I really feel? Then, that's a positive. And also because that's the area that, like we had the ability to communicate. I don't think we can communicate the ideas of suicide prevention in the same way that we can emotional intelligence. So.
It's kind of the difference between we talk about this all the time in our work across the board, but it's systems oriented rather than outcome oriented. If we have a good process for being able to identify and regulate our emotions, we're going to be able to ask for help when we need it. We're going to be able to, build these deeper relationships. Yeah, exactly. So I think that's our ethos just in general with all of the work that we do, and I think the approach of the Charlie Fund mirrors that.
What were those initial conversations as like the Charlie Fund was, while you guys were having that conversation of like starting this thing, what were those initial conversations like? What were the goals you were setting, and also like intention, right? You have to navigate this with a lot of intention, especially because it's something that's so personal to you guys. Like how did those conversations kind of like go?
Yeah, I think our first conversation was, I think we knew we were going to do it pretty much right away. And I think we knew also that a year after Charlie passed was going to be the right time to really do it. So, before that summer, I think it must have been March or May when we sat down for our first brand meeting. And I think we started on visuals actually before we started on what we were going to be doing. And we, wanted it to represent Charlie, who was a bit of a throwback of a human being, had this didn't feel super modern when you met him, but also, had this very particular vernacular and this way he communicated. And for some reason, something that really called to us was old posters from museums. And I think the barometer we set for ourselves early was everything should feel like if you printed it out and put it on a subway ad, it makes sense there visually in the 70s or 80s in New York. And so that was the very, very first thing we cleared. And then we were talking to Henry about emotional granularity, Henry from Still Life. And Henry really brought it all together and explained to us, this idea that Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett studies a lot of the fact that as we become more able to identify specific emotions, we get better at addressing them within ourselves. And that really resonated. And I think for us, that became like, okay, cool. Then we knew what we wanted to do visually and how we wanted to look and feel, and then we knew what we wanted to talk about. So those were those first conversations, and I think like there was a lot of healing in approaching it like a normal work project, which sounds crazy, to do after we both lost someone so recently, but I don't know, I felt like there was a lot of healing in the way we approached it and just like going at it in a pretty mechanical way.
Yeah, I think often with grieving something that big, I don't know, there's a temptation to just kind of do it in big doses, and it felt like having something that we both are putting our fingerprints all over and we're doing it weekly, if not daily, it sort of forces you to like break it into smaller pieces. And there's like an intimacy, I think, between you and I feel like, you and I kind of broke through walls working on it.
Well, I don't like I don't talk about losing Charlie a lot. I don't like in conversation with friends, like just bring it up and casually go there. I think it's a thing that really shifts the tone of a conversation when that comes up. And so it gave me and Indy, like in those really early days, an outlet to talk about it. And in an arena that felt really familiar because we, at that point have already spent years collaborating on stuff together. So it wasn't like I have to introduce this person. We have so much shared language that collaborating with Indigo was the most comfortable possible space to talk about losing Charlie, and then we needed something to work on. Mm-hmm. So it very naturally became like kind of the bucket to dump all that into.
Like you're channeling all of this grief and like putting it into this creative expression, and also it's not just healing for you guys, but you're also like helping others. I mean, and that's the main goal, I want to like bring it back to like how you guys met and what that dynamic was like from the beginning and how it's shifted.
Spanish class.
Yeah, Miss Douglas.
Spanish class with Miss Douglas at Heritage. We were in the same class, and I think like I had like my camera on my desk or something. We had photography later that day, and we started talking about cameras, and like Indigo was kind of one of the cool kids. I was kind of one of the dorks, and so like I was kind of like I knew of Indigo because Indigo was at every single party going as hard as possible all the time in high school, and I was like, why does this person want to talk to me about cameras right now? And so like we just kind of got there, and then I think we had 3 classes together that year. I think we had Spanish, photography, and yearbook.
Yep, and then I don't really remember why we were doing this, but the first time we hung out, we woke up at like 6:30 in the morning, and we went to this like field with, this is like so pixie dream girl, so like forgive.
We got paid to do it. It was for for one of your mom was doing the interior design for a hospital.
Yep, in Wellington.
In
so
Wellington.
It's like very equestrian.
Wellington's where all the horses are in South Florida.
Okay.
And so
we went there at like 6 o'clock in the morning to like take photos of horses at sunrise.
Yeah.
And then that just kind of like kicked off our whole, like we would just
do silly shit like that.
And but sometimes we were getting paid for it, and other times we were just like giving ourselves projects. We're like, what we should do? We should probably wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning tomorrow, stop at 7-Eleven, eat probably a dozen powdered donuts, and then drive to Miami and like break into this like empty building.
The old Marine Stadium.
Yeah.
Wow. Wait, that's actually crazy because I feel like that's exactly how you guys like work together as business partners now.
Yeah.
So to know that was like how, like the foundation of your friendship, and that it all started with like a camera, and that's how the conversation began.
It's all like why, like all the shit that we do. It's like why are we doing this? And it's just kind of like you just gotta like move, and eventually shit will happen.
Yeah.
Like if you flail your arms around, eventually something will get moving.
Mm-hmm. And there's something that still feels nostalgic. I think like, when we connect a lot over food, we connect a lot over like spending time in the car doing like silly errands, and I feel like that's been like a common thread since the beginning of our friendship, which is, it's cool to experience that as an adult, and we
still do the same shit. We're driving to client meetings. We're driving to this.
You're going to all the restaurants along the way.
Yeah, exactly.
We're
still doing the same shit.
How did like color theory come to be? What were those initial conversations like? Because I know it's like a lot of times when you think of like mixing your personal relationships with work, like that could be very scary because it can change a lot of the dynamic and like boundaries can get crossed. So
Yeah.
what was that decision of like, I think this is something that like we should do together?
Neither of us were really happy where our careers were. I was doing social media for athletes. Indigo was, what were you doing?
At a robotics startup.
You were working at a robotics startup. Like the jobs made no sense. And then, we worked on a couple projects together because Indigo was an illustrator, but Indigo wasn't a graphic designer when we started Color Theory. He'd really never done much graphic design. And so I was like, fuck it, Indigo can learn. I've seen some really bad graphic designers out there, and I know Indigo's got a good eye. And so Kenny Stills, who I had been working on social media for, is one of our closest friends, wanted to start a resource in 2020 after George Floyd was murdered to educate people on the Black Lives Matter movement.
Well, he wanted to start it in April, I think, which is like the month before.
Right. Well, so Kenny had been working on all that stuff forever because Kenny was one of the first players who started taking a knee during the national anthem. So like Kenny was talking about the Black Lives Matter movement in 2016. So like way before it reached kind of mass consciousness.
Yeah.
And Kenny wanted to educate on this because we kind of had a head start. And people were talking about all these ideas of, of internalized racism and reparations and reforming like dynamics around police and incarceration. We've been talking about this stuff for years. So Kenny was like, let's just use all of what we know and educate people, and then this happens. And so this is before kind of like Instagram graphic design was a big thing. And so we decided, we were like, let's just do graphics. We don't need people on camera. We don't need high fidelity photography. Let's just make stuff. And so it was one trust, like we didn't have an agreement. I called Indigo and I was like, how much money do you need like to get by? Like to pay your rent, get some food, do whatever. Indigo gave me that number. I picked up the phone, called Kenny and said, this is the budget for the project. And he said, great. So like, and then Indigo quit their job and started doing this. And so it was a lot of trust, and then just every fucking day, like we worked so hard.
And it was really hard to like learn how to accept feedback, give each other feedback.
Oh yeah,
like, it's
early on being like, this thing you just worked for 4 hours on, none of it
doesn't work. Yeah, and it's,
Yeah.
I think like for my lesson, I think a lot of it was not taking it personally and knowing that, like feeling safe knowing that we have the same shared goal and like desired outcome. And I think for you softened a lot, and like how you communicate, like knowing that it's, like
not just being like, bro, this shit sucks.
Yeah.
Like, what the fuck are you doing? Like it.
Navigating it in a way that's like, you're being very mindful of how that's going to impact the other person, but also like you have a job that needs to get done.
Totally.
And that balance was really hard. And I think like there was a lot of times really early on where like it wasn't like, like we slapped hands and Color Theory was born and everything was gravy.
Yeah.
Like this thing almost fell apart 5 million times.
Yeah.
And there are still times where I'll give Indigo feedback and Indigo will be like, that you could have done that a little bit differently, or like, okay, I feel strongly about this, but it's just, you build shared language. I mean, even same with you when we're working together on stuff. Sometimes it's like, okay, that might have been too direct or not direct enough. And like, it, like you said, it's shared goals.
Yeah.
You have to like, and also over communication is like what we've always stressed. Like it's never hurts to just say like, hey, like, I know you tried really hard on this. I totally see where you were going, but we have to start over because it doesn't work for this reason. And like early on, I think also because you hadn't been doing graphic design for very long.
No.
So like it wasn't like, who the fuck is this trying to tell me how to do graphic design? It was like, I'm trying my fucking best and it still isn't there. And it was just pushing the boulder up the hill until eventually
Totally.
gravity took it the other way.
Yeah.
Can you give an example of like a specific time where you feel like you guys had to navigate a really difficult conversation? And, because it's like, I mean, I'm sure, I'm
Every
sure,
day?
no, literally, but like the first time where you're like, okay, this is like a thing and we need to learn how to like move past this or else this isn't gonna work. And how did that like impact the way that you guys communicate with each other now?
Oh, it was the early thing with that startup. There was like a really pivotal Color Theory conversation.
Oh, yeah.
So Indigo was at first working on two things. Indigo was working on Color Theory and this other startup that didn't really end up getting off the ground with another friend of theirs. And there was one point where we posted something and this other startup posted something that looked really similar. And it kind of like compounded at this time when I felt like maybe the attention wasn't being paid to Color Theory. And I kind of gave Indigo like, you got to be all in on this if we're going to do this. And Indigo kind of gave me an, if I'm going to be all in, then I need you to figure out X, Y, and Z, like in terms of how you communicate. And that was kind of like, to me, I look at that as our point of no return, where we were like, okay, we're doing it, you know? And I think also just every day, like, you know, we got into it with each other yesterday.
Days ago.
Yesterday, 2 days ago.
It feels like forever.
About
ago.
something that was so dumb.
Yeah.
Like a call that we had to move or something. Like, it happens every day, and I think it's just about, like, over communicating and coming back.
And there's something to, like, I think it's a combination of, like, being friends for this long and also of having gone through so many, like I don't know, I think there's, like, a very, like, deep secureness knowing, like, I'm going to be in your life forever.
Yeah,
and
share
you're going to
language.
be like, and like, I feel like even if we're fighting, like, I feel like the anxiety coming up because, like, you know, everything in my past is like, oh God, like, this feels scary, but I'm like, I know,
We're here,
like, yeah,
locked
like,
in.
I'm
Yeah.
really, like,
Yeah.
the security of knowing, like, I'm going to be, like, in this with this person forever. It feels good.
No one's ever gonna have that background.
Yeah.
No partners, this, that, the other. Like, nobody in your life other than your immediate family will ever have, like, known you longer, like, in that way, or vice
Yeah,
versa.
there's
Like,
so much history there. There's so much context, you know?
I mean, Indigo, when Charlie died, drove down to LA to move my apartment. Because I had to move that weekend, and then this happened, and so
Yeah.
I had to fly to Florida. Indigo literally drove down,
Wow.
moved, stayed in my new apartment while I was still in boxes, picked me up at the airport when I got back. Like those moments of, you know, like coming back to California for the first time after that happening, like being there for it, you know, and you can't replace presence in that
Totally,
way.
100%.
Like-
I think also our relationship shifted a lot from that point because I think you were in the middle of processing and healing, and I don't even think you're at healing yet. It was just really processing, and like you were sort of forced to trust me, like on a personal level of like taking care of like all like your possessions and like those logistics, but then also like trusting with that like the ship will stay afloat
Word.
while
Yeah,
you're
with the
going through
business,
it,
yeah.
you know. And I think like it just there was like I
carried the baton I think I carried the baton for a really long time, and that was the first time that I totally let it go.
Yeah.
And was just like,
And and like the fact that they could just like pick that up.
yeah,
like that's,
exactly.
You know.
Well, and that's like I'm like an over worker, over manager, over everything, and like to just Indigo just be like, I got it. You're good. Do your thing, and then to have it actually work was like the first time, you know, for me where I was like, oh, like when you have people around you can trust, you can just let them do the thing,
Yeah.
and the thing will happen.
Yeah.
And we had been talking about like, you know, being committed to each other and color theory for so long, but you know, you can say that so many times, then when that gets like put to the, not that was a test, but it was like when that like becomes like, you know, you're living it, it changes the dynamic.
Well, it is, because when
Yeah.
you're going through grief, I feel like you have two choices with everything in your life. You either, you either like lash out at it, or you use it as your foundation.
Yeah.
And there's nothing after Charlie died that I leaned on more heavily than color theory and work and this outlet. You know, like we had a really meaningful 6 months after Charlie died of our first real time having success on a project when we built Still Life.
Yeah.
You know, so we were working on Still Life with Spencer and Henry, and, you know, like I pitched Still Life, got in my car to drive home, and that's when I got the call about Charlie in November. And so coming back, my first work call after was also Still Life. And then working on this thing and building it. You know, I remember right when it started to go well, I think we had just hit 100,000 followers or 75 or 80, and at my birthday party that year. And it was my first birthday party without Charlie there. And I looked around, and there were also all these new faces, and it felt really good that the biggest thing I was leaning on in my life at that time was our partnership. You know, it was like almost like a new life after
Yeah.
Charlie died, of like, oh shit, this is something real. Because
Yeah.
we talked smooth in meetings, but we didn't have a case study
Yeah.
until that. We didn't have like something where we could like go in and be like, look at these numbers,
Yeah.
this works.
Yeah.
And yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it just like this work is grounded in like caring for others, and caring for one another and
Yeah.
building that trust. And so how do you build the vocabulary to, communicate and collaborate and for that to be reflected in the work that you do?
I think it's inherent. I think like you can feel soulless work from a mile away. I think, and that's not to say work can't be work. Plenty of people do really good work and just clock in and clock out. But for us, I think part of the reason that you can feel when we've like been working on something together, like the Charlie Fund, for example, is it's like, oh, like there's an angle here and they're doing it consistently. I think like even, and that becomes the foundation of letting new people in, like you joining the team. You know what I mean? Like you can come onto the team and it doesn't feel like, oh, this other person did this work. Because it's care and you really care for each other. And it's, like I don't know, it feels more like a home cooked meal than it does like food you buy at, like a fast
That's
casual
designed
restaurant.
to taste good.
Right, like food
Yeah.
that's designed
Yeah.
to taste good versus
Well,
home
because
cooked
also
food.
like we all like it's not just like, oh, this person takes care of this and this person takes like, yes,
all touch
have-
everything.
we all have our like assigned roles, quote unquote, but like we all have like, say in everything that gets put
Yeah.
out, and we lean on each other so heavily. So
We're
like,
dependent on
if
following through on.
There's no
Yeah.
one thing that you could remove from the process. I think you could probably take me out of it most days. But other than that,
we can't
like,
do the
No,
finances.
we
okay?
can't.
yeah, that's right. Yeah,
or the hard phone calls.
when the invoice,
we
when,
cannot do the confrontation.
when redacted doesn't pay their invoice, you guys can't hop on the phone. But I think it's like for us, it's also you just can't fake when people who care about each other are working on something.
Yeah.
I always compare it to
Totally.
music. It's like being in a band. Like when you see musicians on stage and they can communicate without talking, that's the thing. And when like when 1 + 1 starts to equal 3, then you just keep adding. And you hope that 1 + 1 + 1 ends up equaling 7. Like you just keep adding things into that and hope that the sum is greater than its parts.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's how that expression goes, but
And I think the other part of it too is a lot of it just comes down to having reps, like getting feedback
so
of like
much,
you know
yeah.
when we're on calls we're like, okay, we gotta, like we did with the video last week, let's trim the end and let like you start to have, I think that's part
remember
of the
that
shared
graphic
language.
we did for this thing? Oh yeah, let's do it
Yeah,
more
that
like
headline style or whatever, like it starts to feel more the hard like feedback and like back and forth that can feel like hurt feelings or like the drag. It becomes almost mechanical, so that then you can get to the creative stuff. Like, okay, well, we know that this doesn't work, and that's no big deal. But what are we going to do to make it cool? And like, then we start to
Yeah.
riff. Like, it just makes space for the.
Totally.
And with the Charlie Fund, it really became a culmination of that because it's like we don't have a client to regulate it. We are creating everything for the Charlie Fund. So we don't have to answer to a call. So that's also the biggest trust fall. Because if we wanted to do that in a loosey-goosey way, we could.
Yeah.
And I think that like that's another big thing with trust is we all trust each other with that thing without the guardrails of we're going to get a phone call from a client that's like, hey, this caption isn't exactly what
Yeah.
I want. Like we are that thing. So to function as a collaborator and a client, as we all do, with our people, that's tough.
Yeah.
And that's been really hard.
How would you say that your relationship with each other has shifted? I mean, obviously, like trust is a huge thing, right? Like that's one of the biggest things that you've built even more trust working together as like business partners. But what has been the biggest difference?
I think that our relationship is one that requires like a place to put a lot of energy. I think like a lot of friendships are the opposite. We all have plenty of friendships that are easy on purpose. You just kind of kick it, you hang out, you go do whatever. I think our friendship has always been like, we need to do something. Even like that thing of us going to a horse sanctuary. Dude, like, why are you doing that? Like, you're just high school friends. Like, just like,
Go steal some beer.
I was just about to say, go like have someone buy you some beers in 7-Eleven and go drink them on the beach. Like,
Right.
whatever. But like, for us, our relationship requires a place to put energy, and this is the most productive place we've had to dump that energy. So it's, like we have as many touch points in each other's lives as like a romantic partner would,
Yeah.
in terms of just every day talking. We talk so much. We communicate so much.
So much.
That like, I think that's what it's made our relationship stronger because like it gives us something to do together, and it gives us like a kind of like sun to orbit around.
I think when you asked that question, I immediately went to like the different roles that you've played in my life. I mean, I think even when we met in high school, like my mom was going through a divorce. It was super tough at home. And I almost felt like you were a year younger than me, but you were like a big brother to me, you know? And like in some, like when we're talking about like stuff that makes me uncomfortable, like when I'm umming and ahhing about money and finances and like making like adult choices, like you become, like you step into like a fatherly role in a way too. So it's like, it's really interesting, I think, depending on like what stage of life we're in or what immediate issues or situations like we're facing individually or collectively, like we kind of shift through these different, where sometimes you are a mentor, sometimes you're my best friend, sometimes it feels like you're my romantic partner, you know, like it feels like we're in a marriage.
It really feels, well, because it feels like a marriage where we have kids.
Totally.
So it's like, we are not getting a divorce. Like we are,
You gotta
think
take
about
care
the baby, think about the child. Who's gonna raise this kid? But like, it really does feel like that sometimes.
Yeah.
And I think also that, you know, like, there's comfort when a relationship starts to evolve in that way, because we also know we can continue to take on different roles with each other because we've done it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like we've already taken on so many roles in each other's lives that we know, like, oh, like that relationship could change again.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but we've got a lot of shared language around that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love it. What I need to like look back at my question. I had a question and then I lost
Can
it.
I ask you a question?
Sure.
When you first started working with Indy and I, what was the thing that kind of drew you into it, and what was the thing that scared you the most about, like,
Yeah.
oh, who the fuck are these
Oh,
two?
that's a good question.
It is a good question. I feel, okay, so I remember
And for
like,
background, for everyone at
Oh, yeah.
home, Tab started working with us about like a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
So like we had already started the Charlie Fund. We had already done a lot of this, and you know, so Tab has really helped push us into like the next phase of what we do, but definitely still feels new.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like an ongoing learning process, but I definitely feel way more ownership now than before, because also I was coming into something that you guys had created.
You're coming into like dinner service
Yeah.
at 6 p.m.
Well, and
like
it's
into the
also, like,
kitchen.
Right.
It was an interesting time because like I was like freelance. I had quit my job and I was freelancing, not really making like that much money freelancing because it was like the strike, like there's all this stuff. And I was talking to you and you, like, I was just like, yeah, I don't know, like I don't really have any job leads.
It was
And
literally perfect.
It was perfect
Indigo and I
timing.
had talked, I think, earlier that day about like, we need to find someone who can like take on these projects as a Swiss Army knife, who can like do a little of everything, and who's like down with the ecosystem and isn't gonna be weird about like all the back and forth. And Indy was like, yeah, fuck, it's gonna be so hard. I was like, yeah, I know, right? And then Indy, one of your biggest like
2 or 3
one of your
hours
biggest
later.
dipshit moments ever. One of my favorite, like you being a complete moron stories.
Do you know
You
anyone
text-
in the
Indigo
creative
text-
space that's
Indigo-
looking to hire?
Indigo texts me like, do you know anyone in the creative space who like is looking for kind of a Swiss Army knife, who can like take on a lot of projects and is okay with the back and forth? And I was like,
Reread that
I
text.
was like, dial that back one more time. And I remember I was in Florida. We hired you in a day.
Literally in a
We
day.
brought you
It
on
was so fast.
We brought you on in a day.
It all happened so fast and it all happened at once, but at the same time, like I had like just met you like
Yeah.
a few months ago. Like you were my partner's best friend, so I was like, is that weird? Like, is that gonna change the dynamic?
Yeah, it's
I had,
weird,
Yeah.
but let's do it.
So I went in and I was stoked, but I was also just like, I don't really have a relationship with these people yet, and they already have such a strong relationship, and I was like, okay, so like I gotta like find my place here. And from the beginning, you guys were always like, over communicating is the best thing to do. Like we want you to say, like you guys always said it, and I think it took me a minute to like get like just fully feel that, because again, like I'm not a very like, I don't know, I feel like when there is pushback, like when creative pushback or when there's things like that, like I kind of just like shut down because I also like past work trauma, like all, you know what I mean?
We had
But
that
you guys
first conversation
yeah.
where you were like, you were like learning how to communicate it in real time. You called me. It was like a Friday
I
afternoon.
was so scared. I was
And
like, I don't know.
You called me and you were like, I just need us to do like more of like this. And you
Yeah.
were actually talking like that. I was like, I need specific examples. And you were like, well, like.
And it was
I
like
don't
from so
have
long
them.
ago because I was
it was
letting
like
it
from
build
months
up.
ago because
Yeah.
you let it build up. And that's when we had the conversation where I was like, Tab, if something bothers you, call it out literally the second it happens. And just say like, hey, I don't like that.
Yeah.
I don't like this, because then we remember it.
Yeah.
I say a lot of obnoxious shit. I'm like, I don't remember what came out of my mouth 2 months ago.
I literally don't even remember what it
No,
was.
no, neither of us do. But that was the point where like you were vulnerable for the first time and you were like, hey, I don't like how things are going. And instead of making it a problem,
Yeah.
we were both in that moment just like, okay, cool. Well, this is how we fix it in the
Yeah,
future.
and I think that initial conversation, like that buildup was so scary because I was like, I don't, like, we do communicate in like such different ways. And before I was just like, I don't know how to like have that, have that initial conversation. And then after that, I was like, oh, like it's
Yeah.
just that simple. And
Yeah.
like, if you have feedback, I'm able to be like, okay, well, I like that. And like, we can have that like creative pushback.
Well, you've had enough wins now,
Yeah.
also that you know you can be
Exactly.
confident. Like
Yeah.
you've, you know, all these things for anyone listening to this, it's probably because you found it from the Charlie Fund, and like, you know, all the stuff that you've curated where you've been like, we should present this quote, or we should present this study, or this piece of information that people are like, oh my God, this is great. You know, like, I got this. So now it's just all microtransactions.
Yeah, being able to be vulnerable with the people that you like, that you work with is so rare, but it's so important, I think.
And people talk about it, but it doesn't happen often. You know, like,
Yeah.
I mean, exactly what you said about over communicating. Like, you know, I think for the first year and a half we were working together, the words that Max probably said the most was like proactive communication, proactive. And I was like, yes, I'm
Yeah.
proactive, I'm communicating. And I was like, you know, looking
And then
back,
you
I'm
would
like,
be-
I wasn't.
No.
I wasn't.
And now you don't say it as much because now we're being more.
Well, now we get it. Now I don't want any more communication. Now we're
Yeah,
good.
you're like,
we got
"Stop
plenty.
talking to
We
me."
got plenty. I think, you know, in the early days, like, it's that whole thing of, you know, coming back to emotional vocabulary, like, for you to know what it makes you feel like when I give feedback that you don't like. It's like, that's important. Like, you got to be able to label it. It's shared language.
Yeah.
It's the same thing we do with the Charlie Fund. It's like when you build shared language with someone, it allows you to communicate in fewer words and to do it more efficiently.
Yeah.
And so like all of us communicate pretty efficiently now. You know?
And I think there's a process of like, there's the process as like a team of us all building trust in that shared language together. And while we're building this, we're also breaking down like whatever the old patterns and like loops we'd get stuck in, like, because I think, you know, you had like a couple of like work experiences that were really stressful and like consistently like asking you to go above and outside of your like boundaries and need, not to say, you know, the
therapy
forsaken
podcast.
word
no boundaries, no boundaries.
but you know, getting pushed past like the limits that you were comfortable with, and you know, we definitely wanted to be respectful of that, but it kind of comes with time and, you know, putting our money
Yeah.
where our mouth is in terms of acting on it.
Well, that's one of the biggest things you taught me. Is I was like a we need to work every day person, and for the first year we did. We worked 7 days a week, and then you were like, "Hey, I need some fucking time off. Like, I need some time to turn my brain off." And I was like, "Indigo's so fucking lazy. Like, let's like just come on, like just work. Like, you don't need that much time off. We're 23, whatever." And then we started doing it. And Indigo would come in on Mondays, like ready
you
to
gotta
go.
recharge,
And,
yeah.
and I'm not like I'm like a work 4 hours every day instead of like 8 hours, 5, like, you know, like whatever. But like the math there is going to be really embarrassing because it's going to come out to like working less than a normal work week. But either way, like Indigo really showed me like, oh, like that's valid. You know, like that really makes sense. And then when you came on, it was kind of the opposite problem of like, no, we mean it. We aren't going to make you like work all day on Sundays. And you're like, don't make me work on Sundays. We're like, I promise we're not going to ask you to work on Sundays. And you're just like,
You're
don't
like,
fucking do it.
I will not be texting you past this.
And we're like,
well, and now though, because that was respected, like if something comes up on like a weekend, I'm like, sure. Like,
Yeah, it
I
happens.
think also because I know that you're not my past work experience, so I'm like, okay, it's different. now.
Redacted.
Yeah, exactly. But we have that like every time. Like I feel like it happens regularly where it's like we'll finish having a call with like a client or whatever, and then we like call each other and we're like, so how did that feel? Like, what's coming up for you? Like, how do you know? We're always checking in on each other, and like we prioritize like us as a team, and it's like because if the whole like if one of us is down, like then this can't.
I think in building the Charlie Fund, what we're all trying to do is build something really sustainable. I think that's the whole reason we're doing the conversation series and why we're filming this is we want to be looking back in 30 years and say, yes, that was a stepping stone to this.
Totally.
And these conversations like can feel, even while I'm sitting here, these conversations can feel like, why are we doing that? Why are we talking about all this stuff? And then you zoom out and you're like, oh, this context is going to be so helpful in 10 years when you pair it with more of these conversations and more of this experience. And come back to, remember when we talked about this, we're starting that building of shared language with that community too. And I
Totally.
think that like, for us, it feels weird to like air this out. You know, this is all stuff that goes unsaid between us, but we
Yeah.
all know and agree with. And it's cool to think that the Charlie Fund is like kind of the house that we're putting this stuff in. I think it's fun to break the fourth wall, like us talking about the workflow for people. So people
Yeah.
out there, anyone who's like, how do they make the Charlie Fund? It's like, well, Tab goes down these rabbit holes and curates all these ideas and puts them into the document. And on Fridays, we talk about them and review them. And the next week, it works its way into Indigo's design. And then we come back together and do all of our feedback. And I'm the one posting and doing comments and engaging with people. And now anyone who's followed the Charlie Fund have been like, what's going, like this is
how
the
the
beginning and
sausage
end of,
gets
this is the
made.
beginning and end of the process, these three people right here. And I think like it's important for people to know all the stuff that goes into that. You know, like it's like
Yeah.
looking at the ingredients in something that you're eating. You know, like you're consuming this thing for whether you're a student in a school that we're talking to, or you're a teacher that we're educating, or you just follow us on Instagram. You know, like this is the back end of every conversation. And to know like it's almost like the eggs that are like happy eggs. You know, like this is our version of that for people. Of like this is the creative process that goes into what you're consuming. It's not like a passive aggressive Slack channel where people are like shit talking all day. It's this is where it starts. and
Inevitably,
ends.
you have to like air out whatever you're feeling because it's such a
It'll
like,
come
you know,
back.
It'll come back. Yeah.
That's why people don't last at
Well,
jobs.
you know, because you're like, okay, what's up? Like, I sense that you're.
Oh, we all know.
Your energy.
We all know. We all know when the other person is doing that, when the other person's not paying attention. Sometimes like, what was it, 2 weeks ago on a call, like Indigo was just like, you and I both weren't paying attention. Indigo's like,
was
are we
like-
doing,
It's like, are we on our phones or what?
Are we on our phones or are we doing this call? Like, what are we doing? Like, oh God.
It's good though because we've built that. Again, it's like once
And no
you've
one's
built
gonna be
that
mad.
trust,
It doesn't leave that.
because you've already
Totally.
created that foundation. Like
That's
you
the whole
know
thing.
that-
There's no like, are you mad at me? Like,
Yeah.
we're all like, we know, like, if we're mad,
You're like, sorry,
we'll
I was being
say
kind of
it.
weird. Like, are you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's just also like it's not everything needs to be a really big
That's what you told me
vulnerable
the other day.
conversation.
Yeah.
where
When
it's
I
like-
called you, I was like, Indy, like,
I was so nervous to tell you that I didn't want to like gaslight and be like, this isn't a big deal, but I was
no, it really wasn't a
I
big
was
deal.
like, let's breathe.
It really wasn't big. For the audience at home, Indigo, we had a call scheduled, and I confirmed the time in the morning in the group chat, and Indigo's like, oh, I got to take my dog to the PT at this time. And
My
I called
dog's in
Indigo, I was
physical
like,
therapy.
Yeah.
Well, that's what we should just
Maybe Tab will
plug.
cut in the little clip of beans on the treadmill with the walking. But I called Indy, and I was like, this would have been really bad if you hadn't communicated this because we would have been on the call. And Indigo's like, and what? We would have had to end 10 minutes early? It would have been really bad. Like, it was like, it really wasn't that big of a deal. I was just getting stressed about this shoot where we're doing all this and looking for a reason to
And
get
sometimes
pissed.
it's like it's not about the other person. Like sometimes it's like I'm stressed about this or you're stressed about that
Yeah.
or whatever. And then I mean we're human beings. Like we're gonna project our shit
Yeah.
every now and then it's up to the other person to be like, you need to chill
Totally.
the fuck
Well,
out.
and
or
even-
just like take
And
a second.
use the
like,
feelings wheel.
Yeah.
Use
Use
the
the
little
feelings
feelings
wheel.
wheel. Be like, are you actually angry?
Yeah.
No, you're not angry.
And that's
you're just
also like
frustrated.
That's actually a really good point because I'm like, how does the work that we do, like how do you bring that into your own personal life? Like how do you like
We decided really early on with the Charlie Fund, I think Tab, you were a big part of this decision too. We didn't want to be prescriptive. We didn't want to tell people like, here are 3 tips for dealing with this. We want to give people a piece of information.
Food for thought.
A potential piece of context and say like, hold on to this, put this in your back pocket, reflect on it. And like, for me, I think that's part of the reason we created the Charlie Fund the way we did is because I don't want someone to tell me 3 tips to help this because like, motherfucker, I would have figured it out.
Yeah.
If there were 3 easy tips to get over this, like anyone would have figured that out. So let's just give people tools to think about the world differently
yeah.
and let them give them something to hold on to, not a beginning and an end point.
I wouldn't even say like if we're talking about like the planting seeds metaphor. I feel like the goal is that we're actually not even planting seeds. We're just handing out little bags of seeds.
Yeah,
Like,
Yeah.
exactly. We're not planting
Planting
seeds.
if you
You plant
want.
your seeds.
Metaphor.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
Put that
I
on
think
a
a big
graphic.
part of
That's
like,
a good. Yeah. Hey, hold on.
I think something else too with where like in the last year I think we've both gotten really tapped into each other's emotions and at least for me like with the seeing my feelings and like as cues almost of like what do I need if it's 3 o'clock and my shoulders are up to my ears because I've just been stressed out typing for the last 4 hours like I probably need to go outside and take a walk. But then the same thing is like if you call me and I'm in a shitty mood and I know that like you're picking up on it, then you're probably feeling anxious and so like we'll get off the phone and I'll just text you and like this is not about you. Like I didn't sleep well or I'm like really going through it today. Like it just I think being able to kind of proactively say like
Yeah.
this isn't this isn't something between you and I. This is like I'm dealing with my own thing, and like I'll reach out, and you know that our job inherently is to create a lot of output,
Yeah.
and like
Yeah.
consistently
Like a lot.
A
And
lot.
we're
A
so
lot
good
of
at
output.
it.
A lot of output. I mean, we're talking like, what are we probably at? Like, we're probably putting out like just between the three of us, like 80 pieces of content a week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say. I mean, well, and the question with that is like, what are the ingredients? Like, and I think all of us have our own inputs that we use. Like, whether that's, what are your inputs in order to create the output? And like, and by that I mean like, what's your recharge, or like, what is the extracurricular or the things that you do to like be able to bring more juice and like keep that like flow going.
Yeah. Oh, is that a question?
Is that
Yeah.
okay?
Oh, I think
Long-winded, but
for me, I really like seeing a body of work come together. With the Charlie Fund, it's really satisfying to be able to go look back and say, like, yes, we've created some space where people might be able to understand a little bit more about their own emotions and to look back on it as a portfolio. I don't think either of us look at likes or comments in that granular of a way. I think we look at, an entire thing and we say like, wow, this is really, we feel a lot of pride in this. And also because we genuinely get to work with people we care about. We love each other, and we have a lot of clients where, like they start off as clients and they're really friends. And I think that's why the work is good, and that's why the Charlie Fund is meaningful. That's why we're doing this thing. It's because we can bring those people into space. A lot of the people who we're talking to in this thing are people we work with. Mm-hmm. Most people, like you said, because you don't show up to work with the right tools and the right vocabulary, you alienate the people you work with instead of saying like, no, we can bring each other closer, because we're not going to take advantage of that. Mm-hmm. We don't, we don't weaponize our friendship against each other.
Yeah.
And I think that's when people work with friends, something that happens a lot is you're like, you weaponize that friendship. And that's, I think, where it goes wrong in most cases.
Mm-hmm. I think the times that I've had the most, not even that I've had the most creative output, but I think that I leave feeling inspired is when we get to meet up in person and just have those creative sessions and talk things out together. I think
you were fired up after that meeting when we met with Open.
Yeah,
shout out to Becca. We
Yeah,
love you, Becca.
shout out. And I think, and then we got those videos and I got to work and I was stoked on it. I think also just because as much as we're constantly communicating with each other, we do work, Indigo and I especially are just hunched over our laptops making content all day, and so sometimes it's when we get to step out of that and kind of regroup, then I'm okay, it feels re-energizing.
And I love
Did
it.
we do it? Did we do it?
We
Day one.
Good question to end on.